This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on, and that's why I do this podcast. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA-regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is about patient advocacy, and we've talked about patient advocacy a few times, but we have what I like to refer to as a luminary in the field. And I like to refer to that primarily because she is, but also because I like using the word luminary. I don't get to use that often enough. And if you are in clinical research and you're curious about how do you work with patients, if you are in marketing and you're working, well, maybe I should be working with patient advocates. If you are a patient and you're going, I have a voice and I want to talk about it and I don't even know where to begin, this is probably the podcast for you. So today's guest is, as we mentioned, a luminary, but she's a patient advocate. She has worked with a lot of the big companies and advised them on how to actually consider the role of the patient in all of its forms. But ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, Tina Om Prakash. Tina, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Darshan. How are you?
I'm doing well. I think allergy season is starting, and I'm starting to get a little worried because every time I sneeze, I see everyone looking at me just a little dirtier.
That's all the pandemic, right?
That's what the pandemic has. That's what I have to show for the pandemic. It's the pain is real.
Yeah.
So Tina, let's talk a little bit about your journey. How did you become a patient advocate? I asked this question to other patient advocates, and each journey is unique, each journey is different. What got you to today?
So I went through a lot with Crohn's disease. I was actually diagnosed back about 15 years ago. What had happened was my father had passed away from Crohn's that had turned into colorectal cancer. My aunt as well, back in New Delhi. And my father was here in New York. And so I, at a young age, was like, I have all sorts of digestive symptoms. Why don't I get this checked out? So I wasn't really symptomatic when I was first diagnosed. And then later on, the symptoms came. So my journey has been quite an interesting one and complex one in the sense that a lot of the medications did not work for me. And I needed to have a lot of surgery. So I've had over 20 surgeries in a period of 7 years. Basically took my 20s from me, this disease. And Crohn's disease, being as aggressive as it was, for me, really had taken my career away. I used to work on Wall Street. I worked at Merrill Lynch and at Credit Suisse as a compliance officer, like yourself, Darshan. So that was... I
don't know. That seems like it might be a grade up, to be honest.
So it was a good career. It was a fulfilling career, and here I was after going through a lot of education and building up a career. All of a sudden, being diagnosed with this, and it sort of took my career and everything I had to my name from me. So it was a lot to struggle with to have this disease, and I rushed into surgery pretty quickly within 2 years, and I needed an ostomy bag. And these are things, this disease and having an ostomy bag are pretty stigmatized in South Asian culture. And I was not seeing anybody talk about this, and I felt very lonely, very ashamed with this disease. And my family had been pressuring me from the very beginning to pursue alternative therapies, all sorts of things, which actually I do believe led me down a worse path and led me into emergency surgery. So having had all these experiences, surgery has really helped me. Of course, I have complications that I'm dealing with even today after having surgery, adhesions and whatnot, but it has really given me life again. and so has medication, biologics specifically. So these are things that I am a proponent for because they have shifted my life around. And coming into my 30s and, having joined a clinical trial of a biologic that turned my entire life around and put me in remission for the first time in 10 years of, unrelenting disease, it became very important for me to start talking about it. Initially, my husband and I were very worried about it because it was really a struggle for us to get married even. In South Asian culture, it's not acceptable. So to have a partner with such intense disease. So it was very much, it felt like social suicide when I did it, but I felt like I had to do this, that this was my calling if I had survived so much.
That's a hell of a journey you've already been on. And I'll be honest, I just taking down notes, I have like 15 questions I can ask you right now. But let's start with some of the basic ones, some of the easy ones. Why do you do it?
Why do I do it? Because, and this isn't just a question of representation. I think representation is extremely important. I actually really want, people of my background to feel like they can come out and share their story, that they can feel less ashamed, that they can feel empowered. There's a lot of education that's missing in our community. A lot of people think that this is a diet and lifestyle disease. Diet and lifestyle can certainly help, but we need medication and sometimes we need surgery. So this is why I do it, to make sure that patients can feel comfortable speaking about it and that they're educated in the best ways possible.
So you said something interesting there. You said members of my community. What is your community here? Is it the South Asian? Is it the patients with Crohn's? Is it the former compliance officers? What?
Great question. So I would say South Asian community as a whole, for sure, in terms of how chronic illness for young people is viewed. I often talk to that community, but I'm also speaking to IBD patients as a whole, because the layers of stigma that IBD patients are facing, IBD meaning inflammatory bowel disease, patients are facing is, different from perhaps other diseases because it's involving your bowels and your digestive tract, and nobody wants to talk about these things. But also there's additional nuances of trauma and sort of cultural expectations and stigmas that are associated with South Asians having this disease. So I'm really speaking to those audiences, not so much, my former Wall Street compliance officer audience. But yeah, I mean, if they're Crohn's patients, sure.
Their voice needs to be heard, I'm telling you. But let's ask a little bit more about that. So I want to get into that. So let's first make sure we address the initial goal you have, which is giving a voice to people in the South Asian community who suffer, especially the young people who suffer from disease states. So the first question is, what is IBD? How is that different from Crohn's? And what does that actually mean? Yeah.
So IBD is actually an umbrella term for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So there's, it's really a spectrum of diseases where ulcerative colitis mainly involves the colon or the large intestine and your rectum. So what this means is that there could be inflammation in these areas of your body. What Crohn's is it's sort of inclusive of the colon and the rectum, but also includes your entire digestive tract. So from your mouth to really your bottom. So Crohn's can attack all over. But the thing to recognize about these diseases is that they're not just bathroom illnesses, they're not just digestive diseases, they often come with extraintestinal manifestations too. So you could be having liver problems, eye problems, skin problems that are all related to potential worsening of your disease.
So you talk about this, and I'm thinking of you pre-marriage. I'm thinking of you meeting your potential husband and having to have that conversation.
Yeah.
I want you to know how do you even raise that question, like you you can't do one of those, let's get drunk one night, I'm going to tell you, and hopefully you'll never remember, and we can move on, because now I can clear my conscience because I've told you, but you don't remember any of this. How do you actually raise it?
You know, that's such an excellent point that you're bringing up, Darshan. And this is, just to sort of, give you a broader perspective of the problem here is that in a lot of cultures, especially Asian cultures, not just South Asian, but Middle Eastern and Far East Asian too, a lot of people don't disclose before marriage, especially in the arranged marriage paradigm. They're not disclosing this illness. Where's the foundation of trust? What are you building your relationship off of? These are big concerns. This was a big issue for me going into my relationship with Anand, my husband. When we met, I had just in the last few months been diagnosed. And so I told him within, I believe it was about 3 to 4 weeks of us dating. And, I just sat down with him and I was like, look, we're starting to get serious now. And, this isn't something I was thinking to bring up on a first date. But it was something that before we got serious, I needed him to know if this is something he was willing to pursue. Even though my case was very mild, I told him, leave now if this is a concern for you, because I don't know what this could look like. It could remain mild, but it could look like my father's disease. And it did look like my father's disease, and he stuck around. So, which was very difficult in our culture because many people told him to leave. That's how I had that conversation. It's not something I did over a drunken night or anything like that, but it was very much calculated in the sense that I wouldn't want anybody to do this to me. So I have to also respect him and make sure that he knows as soon as we're starting to get serious.
Sorry, I was trying to make sure I have all the terms in there.
No.
So, as we're talking through this, one of the things you mentioned is, well, a few different things, but the one thing that pops out is you talked about arranged marriage. Was yours an arranged marriage?
No, we actually met through friends. I was 22. I'd just been diagnosed a few months prior, and he was 23. So we were both working on Wall Street, and we met with friends.
Okay. Have you had a chance to talk to people who have had arranged marriages, and how have they raised that concept? Because obviously I'm Southeast Asian as well.
Yes.
I grew up in India as well. And there's an element, and this is the lawyer in me coming out going, you know what? I wonder if it's too soon to actually know if this is real.
Yeah.
And do I need to disclose something if I don't even know if it's real? Am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Am I tying my identity around something that may not even exist?
Exactly.
So how do you battle that initial conversation of, do I need to disclose?
For me, it was a no-brainer because I'll be really honest with you. My father did not disclose, and it is something that, does sit with my family till this day. And, that had he disclosed he had this, perhaps, different decisions could have been made, different expectations could have been there. But it's generally not common practice to disclose. Arranged marriage culture is very much, as you know, Darshan, it's very much around fitness to perform, fitness to be a good wife or a husband, to work, to take care of children, to reproduce, first of all. That's what arranged marriage culture is around. So even if I didn't have an arranged marriage, very much those expectations are still there, especially from in-laws and from a family. So the thing is, I hear from a lot of patients from India and even here and in the Western world basically saying, do I disclose or not? I've just been diagnosed. Is this something I need to disclose? My thing is, I need there to be a foundation of trust. I need there to be support and compassion. That's me. I think for everybody that looks a little bit different, and also not everybody has sort of the understanding of, okay, my father passed away from this, so I feel obligated to disclose. But if this is something new in your family and no one's ever been diagnosed with it and you have a mild case, perhaps you see how things go with this person. I wouldn't say disclose on the first or second date, for sure not. And with arranged marriage culture, though, I have honestly told people who reach out to me that before you get married to somebody, you need to sit down and tell them you have this. It's up to them to research it, to understand it, but you should not carry that burden. People have gotten divorced over it, and I've spoken to people who've gotten divorced over it. So it is something that I know I couldn't live with myself if I had done.
So what I hear you saying is that, and again, please feel free to correct me. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No.
But what I'm hearing you say is that you identified a problem, which was the silence in the Southeast Asian community. You then identified one solution, which was bringing light to that problem.
Yes.
But you then took it to the next level and you started saying, how do you solve the problem itself?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is Crohn's. And to do that, you went from becoming a person who was a compliance officer on Wall Street to becoming a person who's connecting with other individuals and saying, here's the problem that we're facing, and I want to bring light to that situation, but also I want to be part of clinical trials. So how did that journey happen from I'm one person with a disease to I'm not going to work to fix the disease?
In my journey, I think there came a turning point where I had been through so much surgery, so much heartbreak from nothing working. At some point, I realized when I needed to go to Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic for my care in New York, that my case was being studied, that my case was potentially changing the way medication or surgery was being done or evaluated. And I think that recognition came when I started going to these top institutions who were saying, we've seen this in 2 other patients, or we've done this in 1 other patient. Are you okay with going ahead with it? So I knew that this was potentially groundbreaking science, and that if I wasn't helping to push the envelope, then what was the point? If I had survived all of this, thanks to those hospitals and their care, I wanted to take those lemons and really turn them into lemonade. And that's why, going back to your original question, why do I do this? That's why I got involved in clinical research and clinical trial. I wanted to give myself quality of life back, but I also wanted to continue to contribute to science. And because of that sort of passion that developed, through all these frustrations, I'm actually also pursuing my master's in public health now. So I am I'm enrolled, I'm about halfway through my master's at Mount Sinai in New York City. And that's right up my alley, like in terms of advocacy, health literacy, health disparities, all of that is, my jam, so to speak.
No pun intended. Around the jam. Okay, so you've landed up in a scenario where you're literally making lemonade out of your lemons. Yeah. And I guess the question to ask then is, how do people reach out to you about your lemons if they want to ask for the Om Prakash touch, if you will?
I love it. The Om Prakash touch. Okay, so there's a number of ways. I have a blog, ownyourcrohns.com, and there's a number of people who reach out via that. I actually have a Facebook community that I just started in the last couple of months, and it has about 550 South Asians from around the world, still growing. So because we just started, and I have some lovely moderators who are helping me put that Om Prakash touch on. And we really help people, guide them, navigate them. Don't give them medical advice, but tell them, why don't you ask your doctor about this or that, or have you looked into this or that? And that's how we sort of help them through, the lemons that they might be going through. And we sort of help ourselves now in our own way by sort of coping and telling ourselves this is the difference that we can make by helping other people. And also in that regard, talking about how society views us by talking about marriage or, even sexual issues, or talking about, food, diet, all sorts of things, COVID, the vaccines, safety, all of that is stuff that we talk about. I even talk about my clinical research, clinical trial experience. So I think that's all very important, and they can basically ask anything via that channel.
Which really raises that next question, isn't it? Which is, you're talking about true community building at a global level. You have 550 Southeast Asians in that community. My first question to you is, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this in a way that our audience can sort of understand and incorporate into how they see it. You're a strong woman from New York City. How does the woman sitting in Aurangabad in India learn to relate to your experiences?
100%.
Or a young man, to add even more divergence, if you will, or do you connect on the commonality and then build out the differences?
Excellent question. So I think we're connecting on many fronts. So definitely the disease front, definitely the front that I look like them, am from the same country as them, but also the diet is the same, the food, the language, the understanding of sort of the cultural issues, the stigma that we're facing. How do we cope? How do we handle family? How do we handle insensitive remarks around, oh, we can't eat that on this holiday because we can't digest that? How do we tell family that? These are all things that, even though I'm sitting here in New York City, yes, I'm a cosmopolitan woman. I have very much felt and faced the traditions of our culture and continue to face that. I'm very much married into a traditional Indian family, and have faced the same stigmas from my family and his, and family friends who have said, no, Tina, you can't go down the surgery path. No one's going to marry you with an ostomy. These are things people in India are hearing too. Yeah. So there is that commonality based on that. Oh no, you got to try this with diet first, not with medication. This is stuff that people in Europe are hearing too. This is stuff that people in the Middle East are hearing too. And that's what we're connecting on, is those topics. And then hearing about marriage. How did you get married? How do you manage a marriage? How do you get the help that you need to maybe cook or clean or do the things that you need to do and still be well? These are things that we talk about. And so I feel like we connect on all of these fronts, even though, my upbringing might be different, being from New York and New Jersey.
So you talk about your upbringing being different. You talk about yet you're bringing that voice, that community. You spoke a little bit about your journey that got you to where you are today. Could you talk a little bit more about your next steps in terms of if you're becoming a patient advocate, and I'm a sorry, I'm gonna sneeze, which is partially why I'm trying to balance those two things out.
Yes, you in advance.
It didn't even come. It's one of those fake sneezes, I think. It's at the tip of your nose. Anyways, we didn't need to make my sneeze into the star of the show for a second there. But I guess my question really is, when you start focusing on the voice of the patient, did you start off with clinical trials? Did you go down the whole, I am representing the community and clinical trials is just a component of it, but I also help with other components? What are the components you get pulled into? And what are people going, I want to talk to Tina about this?
You know, in the very beginning, it started with me sharing my story. I honestly had no idea this would turn into this. I shared my story via the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. It was picked up by a lot of publications, a lot of people wanting to interview me, and because they were, I guess, like, we'd never heard this angle. So I never had the intention to sort of represent the community, and still think that there's room for additional players always, and additional voices, and am working on elevating others in the process to make sure that we have a wide variety of voices who can represent the community. So for me, it's been more about starting with the psychosocial. That led to, oh, wait, Tina has clinical trial experience, and that's where sort of pharma came in. So I do work with pharmaceutical companies to understand what patients need. Also, not just what patients need, but more complex aspects of Crohn's disease that don't have proper treatment, the fistulas. That's something that I've suffered from extensively, and why I've had so many surgeries is I've had perianal fistulizing Crohn's disease, which is basically your intestine gets so inflamed that the lining of the intestine breaks through into other organs. So that's a very difficult aspect of the disease to treat. This is how I've gotten involved sort of in the clinical research space is, Tina, give us more knowledge on these fistulas and how, biologics or surgery have treated them, because pharmaceutical companies are trying to make sure that there are more targeted drugs, and I've been pushing for that as well, is that there's more targeted drugs so women and men with these horrific aspects of this disease can have quality of life again and not be constantly in sepsis. So this getting involved in clinical research, getting involved with pharmaceuticals kind of came out of my coming out journey, and starting to speak up for myself, and starting to just make others feel like they can be accepted too, and that they don't have to hide in sick shame or in silence.
That's a great line, by the way. Never having to hide in sick shame or in silence. Is that one you've actually used before?
Yeah,
really
yeah.
Cool.
I mean, that's how I feel. Is that I've had to hide throughout my 20s and my early 30s in that way, and it's not an existence that feels fulfilling. It's not an existence that feels true to myself. So I can only imagine how that feels for others. So I just like to provide a voice, provide that shoulder to lean on, and say, you know what, whether or not you come out with your journey, just know that you are accepted and you are loved, and that there is a community for you.
So that raises that question you said a little earlier, where you were saying that your voice isn't heard, and you think that there's space for more voices to be heard. In a time when the FDA is talking about diversity in clinical research, one of the things that comes out in my head is we're less than 1% of the U.S. population. We have one voice. You've met your quota. No one else is allowed to be Southeast Asian and talking about Crohn's, because we already met the Crohn's quota, if you will. What is your response to someone going, no, we all bring a different voice. We all have a different journey. And I guess I'm talking not just in the context of Crohn's, really diversity of opinion, diversity of representation is what I'm trying to bring to the table.
I really think that that's not the case. And I've actually said this in the past, and not just to pharma, but to nonprofits, is that we need to elevate other voices, not just mine. And I'm actually on diversity task forces for a few pharmaceutical companies and for nonprofits, and advising on such practices. So I've actually taken somewhat of a backseat to make sure that others start to get elevated, if they feel comfortable. So the reason why I feel this way, though, Darshan, is because there's different age groups of us too. Like, I'm in my 30s. My experiences might be such, but I've noticed that, young Crohn's and ulcerative colitis patients in their early 20s are willing to speak up more, whereas the ones in their late 20s and 30s and 40s might not be of our descent. So it's more like I want to make sure that the young adults also have that representation, because they need to feel free and liberal with whatever it is that they want to disclose, and also feel empowered at the same time. But I also think that there's a voice for the older generation of South Asians, whether or not they're willing to come out. That's very difficult at this juncture, from what I've noticed. But the young community is itching to come out. So I would like to see more of that, and I would like to see, well-informed patients who have experienced a lot bring their voices to the table and share what it is that they're going through. Like, I can't just represent the community based on my experiences. My experiences might speak for a lot of people, but just like there's many Black voices coming forward, or many Latinx voices coming forward, there needs to be more than just one person or filling a quota here.
Right. Which brings me to what I want to suggest is maybe the last question of many more future interviews. But let me ask the question here, which is, you talked about the young voices who are itching to come out. You talked about the 20s, 30s, and 40s and individuals in those groups hoping to come out and ask questions. By the way, we have Elizabeth Curian, who is saying excellent point on diversity of experience. So I agree. And she's a pharmacist as well, I believe. I know Elizabeth from either working with her or going to law school. I can't remember. Going to pharmacy school. But anyways, the point I wanted to make that I think is fascinating is, as you get into the older age groups, what do you say to those people going, and excuse the accent that goes along with this, but beta, you know what? In my years, we didn't have to do this. We didn't have to show people what we're talking about. So I really should do a better accent, and it's my accent because I grew up with it, but I've lost it every so often. My girlfriend points out that it comes back still. The point being, how do we, in a new world, talk about the patient voice when our own elders go, is this necessary?
Yeah.
And how do you address it?
And I think that's what I dealt with. When I said social suicide earlier, it was the elders who were like, Tina, what are you doing? Like, there are a lot of relationships I've lost over the years doing this kind of work. And that's why this work is so hard for Asian patients, honestly. But going to your question specifically, let's say it's a 60-year-old IBD patient, and she's saying, why do we need to come out? The thing with me, Darshan, is I don't force anybody to share their story or to come out. A lot of times they reach out to me. Sometimes I'll ask them if they feel comfortable, if it looks like they're on the brink of starting to share. So it's more that, if they feel comfortable, they share. But that's why I set up like the private community too, because a lot of the older people will also share, or the moms of, children who are dealing with this disease will start sharing, whereas they won't feel comfortable on a public forum. So this is going to take some time in terms of publicly sharing. I don't think it's going to happen with our generation of elders, but let's say, when we are that generation, I feel like we will be okay with our kids sharing, or we might be okay with ourselves sharing. But I really don't think that we're in any time or place or space to, get our parents or grandparents to start sharing about this disease.
I literally have so many more questions to ask, but I did promise that I'd keep it close to 30 minutes, and we're already over. So let me start by asking, is there a question you want the audience to answer?
Is there a question that I want the audience to answer? I just want to know what the audience is curious to know about our culture and sort of the intersectionality of being chronically ill. That's what I always want to know more about, what people want to know about our journeys. That's my thing.
Well, let me see if I can take my first crack at it. I'd love to have other audience members answer that question as well. I think for me, what I would love to see is an understanding of how are our journeys different. I know that they're all in many ways the same. So it's the differences that really appeal to me, because I love, it tells you a little bit more about the person themselves. So the 60-year-old who comments is going to have a very different take from the 20-year-old who comments. It's going to be a very different take from the Hispanic woman who comments as well. Absolutely. None of which are wrong. They're just different opinions and what value system they come from. So I find that fascinating.
Absolutely. There's a lot of similarities, but I feel like there's a lot of differences, but we're coming together on the basis of this disease, and I think that's what it is. And that the disease, but also the cultural commonality. And even though, like, I feel like I'm talking to a 60-year-old woman about this disease, she's telling me about, her J pouch issues. How do I resolve them? I've had a J pouch, which is one of the surgeries I've had. And we are relating on that front. So the age isn't really mattering on that front. But when it comes to psychosocial issues, when it comes to retirement, when it comes to, she has grown children, that's where, our differences are going to be. But really, a lot of what we're discussing is disease-related and cultural, and what we can eat, what we don't feel comfortable eating, and how we're sort of managing with family and cultural expectations. So we're relating on all of those, and sometimes those have to do with age, but sometimes they don't. So, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so Tina, I mentioned this right before we jumped on. We have a rapid fire round.
Sure.
So we're going to ask 5 questions.
Sure.
When are you most inspired?
When am I most inspired? I think when I read about others coming forward with their journeys and sharing openly and vulnerably the things that have plagued them, and sort of freeing themselves by sharing.
Okay. How do you define success?
I define success as, this is different from the traditional salvation.
Cash.
Price. I don't define
How much money do you save in the last thing you bought, and how much money do you have in your bank accounts? We have now defined Southeast Asian success.
I don't define it that way, nor is it fame or any of that. It's more about being able to feel fulfilled in life, having meaning in life, and having helped people and served a purpose in their life.
Just curious, do you happen to know if Anand shares the same opinion, or does he have a different take? Have you ever asked him?
That's a really good question. He has the same opinion, but we also need money to survive. And I'll be really honest, patient advocacy does not pay the bills at all. I think there's this sort of expectation that, you might be working with pharma, so no, patient advocacy does not pay the bills. So I think we have to have a balanced approach in life, and I think he has a very balanced approach. I'm more of the, meaning and purpose-driven person.
Fair enough. What is your kryptonite?
What is my kryptonite? My husband.
Oh, that's a really good answer. I haven't heard that one before. That's awesome. What makes you happy?
What makes me happy is really, from the bottom of my heart, being able to help people, being able to provide them education, and making sure that they have better quality of life because of, certain education or certain experiences that I've shared with them.
Last question. If you were going to build a 2020 Mount Rushmore, who would be the first person on it, and why?
My mom.
Why your mom?
My mom, oh my God. My mom dealt with my father's death. She raised us single-handedly, got her education during that time, got a job together. By us, I mean my sister and me. And she put us through college. She got us married. She dealt with a lot of shame and blame in our culture. being a widow at the age of 27.
Wow.
My father was 12 years older. He died at 39, and I was 8. And she raised us on her own. And she raised us to be the women that we are today. And I have tons and tons of respect for her because she was my primary caregiver during my sickest years, and she made it work. In spite of people blaming her for this disease, in spite of people blaming her for her husband's death, you know how it goes.
Yeah. So doing a quick recap. During this podcast, we landed up talking about what is Crohn's. We talked about what is IBD, what is the difference between the two. We talked a little bit about your journey. We talked about cultural expectations around patient advocacy and how that plays a role in the intersectionality, if you will, between your identity as an individual of Southeast Asian origins with having a specific disease state. We talked a little bit about cultural norms, for example, disclosing the presence of a disease before and after, or whether you should disclose it before or wait till a little bit later in terms of marriage. We talked about community building and how you're already doing that with the Facebook group. And we talked about your blog as well. We talked about this, the idea of diversity of voices and what does that look like. We talked about your journey itself. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it all. And I'm so glad that we talked about all this because it's so important. Especially the clinical research and the diversity in clinical research. It's really core to my heart because I would really like, as sort of a closing message, I would really like to see more participation on that front. And, we can scream that from the rooftops, but why? Because in order to develop targeted treatments, we really need to understand how different drugs affect different communities and communities of color, LGBTQ. We really need to understand that. And so that's why I encourage patients always to participate in clinical research whenever they can.
So I was actually hoping to talk to you about this later on anyways, which is I'd love for you to come back and we do a whole discussion around clinical research and about how to get patients more involved. So let's have that conversation as well. But I do want to say that nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It's intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Joys of being a lawyer. For those of you who missed it again, Tina, where can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My handle's at Own Your Crohn's, LinkedIn as Tina Swani Om Prakash, and my blog is ownyourcrohns.com. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for hosting, Darshan.
Thank you. And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment. Please subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Tina, thank you so much again.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.